And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena that I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the lack of interaction and connection between fitness and wellness professionals and our healthcare delivery system in this country. This podcast is all about trying to close off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 23, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Dr. John Berardi. This name will likely sound familiar to many of our listeners, as Dr. Berardi is one of the co-founders of Precision Nutrition, which is the largest fitness education and coaching company on the planet. Dr. Berardi has sold Precision Nutrition, and he's moved on to a new phase of his career where he's really looking to give back and help teach a lot of the lessons that he's learned in an almost 30-year career in this industry. This conversation is incredibly insightful on a couple of levels. First and foremost, we're going to talk about his book, Changemaker, and subsequently the Changemaker Academy that developed from the book. And this framework that Dr. Berardi provides in the Changemaker book is, I think, one of the most pragmatic and useful developmental frameworks that I've seen for fitness, wellness, and nutrition coaches. And quite honestly, probably someone going into any profession, but very, very laser focused on people in our type of a helping profession. We're going to spend a decent amount of time talking about that, but then we're also going to dive into a great discussion around the double-edged sword of personal development. And I think it dovetails very nicely from the first part of our conversation into this discussion around where personal development sits as something that is incredibly beneficial, but also where it can become something that's detrimental. So much rich insight in this conversation with Dr. Berardi. I don't want to waste any more time providing any preamble to it. We're just going to get to this episode. For additional information that we'd like to post coming off the episode, please go to our website. It's wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 23. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. John Berardi. Dr. Berardi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I am super excited for this discussion because I have been truthfully a fan of you and Precision Nutrition and all the things you've done for so many years. And I think the biggest challenge in this conversation is trying to keep it under 60 minutes. So I'm going to do my best to do that. And for starters, I think it would be great just to give people, if they've been under a rock in the industry and actually have not heard of you or Precision Nutrition, just give us a little bit of an idea of what your background is like.
Yeah, I guess the nickel tour here is that, again, I'm most well known for starting, operating, running, and then growing and selling Precision Nutrition, which is the world's largest nutrition coaching, education, and software company. So we kind of started out many, many moons ago, before the internet was really a thing. And I kind of even mean that literally, because we started out when people were still on dial-up, which means a lot of people didn't have the internet. Some people who did were very progressive and they were on dial-up. And then high speed came in and that changed everything. So it's probably hard for some of the younger people in the audience to really appreciate what's going on here. But imagine the most basic text-based web page, no images even, taking 18 minutes to load. So there's an article you want to read, you open up a book and you read that while you wait for this web page to load. That's the time we're talking about here. And Precision Nutrition was really the first, we'll call it sort of group online, nutrition and lifestyle coaching program, meaning that folks could, no matter where they lived in the world, get, high quality coaching from some of the world's best coaches. And so again, geographically independent, done online where you could collect lots of data. So it was pretty revolutionary for the time. And that's really what put us on the map, because we were achieving the kinds of results that were in many cases better than what people could get with an in-person coach, with just one-on-one coaching. And so a lot of professionals in the industry were like, teach us how you do that. And so we put together the very first version of the precision nutrition certification at that time, which taught, health, fitness, movement professionals how to include nutrition into their practice. And that's what really took the business off. I mean, to date, 200,000 people have been educated through the program. It's reached all corners of the industry and even beyond the industry. And then finally, what the next big move was we noticed we had, a really interesting kind of online coaching program, a way to collect data, a way to disseminate information to large groups, a way for those groups to connect and intermingle with each other, a way to actually manage hundreds of clients simultaneously for one coach that didn't reduce results. A lot of people think there's a tension, one-on-one is the best. And then as you get to group, the more in the group, the worse the results. But we were actually showing the opposite. Like we could actually outperform one-on-one coaching with a coach to client ratio of 1 to 200. So one coach, 200 clients. But it took a particular way of navigating the coaching relationship and a certain kind of software. And so we were teaching people how we do it, but we didn't have the tool for them to do it. So that was the third big thing. We released a program called Pro Coach, which was a way for coaches who've gone through our certification to then use our software to deliver results to their clients. So that was really sort of what people most know me for. For those who are interested in academic background, I did an undergrad and pre-med, was thinking of going to med school, and then realized at the last minute, I like this exercise and nutrition stuff better. So I did a master's in exercise science and a PhD in nutrition and exercise biochemistry.
Awesome. Yeah, that story of thinking med school, but realizing I like the exercise thing better is very resonant to me, and probably a lot of people that are listening, because there's a pull there.
Yeah.
And you tell people about it. I remember telling my parents, like, hey, mom, dad, I really love this exercise thing, but I'm thinking about going to med school. What do you think? And what do you think my parents are telling me at that point?
Yeah, of course. Same. I come from an immigrant family, and basically that generation, lawyer, doctor, right? Those are the respectable professions.
Right.
So I don't think it's just exclusive to immigrant families, but in immigrant families, like if you're a kid, like if you grew up and had no education, like my parents didn't, they don't even have high school, to have a child that comes out a lawyer or a doctor is epic, right? So I failed them in that way anyway.
Yeah, I think it's better for our industry that you took the path that you took, for sure.
Yeah. And, the interesting thing was, for me, med school was it's set up as a challenge, isn't it? It's like for people who study the sciences, it's like the marketing is the smartest kids go on to become doctors, right? So you want to be the smartest kid, right? So you're going to go for that goal. And that's when, and this is really important, independent of med school talk, right? I'm very grateful. I had this moment of thoughtfulness, clarity, got some coaching around it. But the idea that what do you really love? What are your unique abilities and gifts? Is that going to be best utilized there? Are you going to have the most fun? Are you going to make the best contribution? Is it going to be most resonant with who you are? And the answer was no. Like I had acceptances to med schools and the challenge was present. Like, let me get in there and crush this med school thing and show everybody how smart I am and talented I am. But then I realized I don't think I like this. It's just a tall wall to scale, And so I think we do this a lot in our lives. And I think we'd, in some cases, be better served spending some time and figuring out like what is the resonant path for us, and thankfully I was able to investigate that. And I was like, oh, let me just take this exercise and nutrition thing as far as I can see it going. And, people laughed, like, hey, the exercise science plant up the road isn't hiring, so what are you going to do when you get that master's in exercise science? You're just going to be a personal trainer with a master's degree. And that's a fair and valid point. But the idea was, I was a smart guy and I chased the passion in there. And it, at least in my case, ended up working out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important for people to hear. And when your passion, your purpose, and your skill set all align, that results in some pretty remarkable things for the world and a pretty remarkable life for you.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads me to the concept and the next kind of iteration of your career. So you sold Precision Nutrition, you moved on. I understand you're still probably involved on some level, but you developed this Change Maker Academy. Let's talk a little bit more about this, because this is particularly what I want to dive into, because I have a similar passion to you of helping fitness and wellness professionals develop, not just as a professional, but also as a person. So talk a little bit more about the Changemaker Academy. What's the organization serve, and why did you make the move from PN to Changemakers?
Well, I'll talk about what it is. Essentially, the Academy helps people who are either in health and fitness, working in it currently, or who want to be, turn that passion that they have into a real purpose and a successful career. I've seen it, my whole career. People who generally get in this field aren't getting in it for the money, because there isn't the promise of that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. If you're in it for the money and a straight linear path to quote unquote success, there's, I can think of 100 fields you ought to pursue before this. So people get into this for one specific reason. They're passionate about change and exercise and nutrition and health and stress management and sleep and all the things that go along with it, and the thriving that can come from that. But they end up getting sad and burnt out because they can't figure out a way to sustain a lifestyle. Usually when they're young, it's fine, right? They make enough money for them, but then maybe they meet a partner or they have a family and they realize they can't support that with a personal trainer or coach type income. And then they leave, which is a shame, because it teaches a whole bunch of bad lessons. You know what I mean? And so I felt like, I've seen enough of the people who burn out, who don't make a good go of this versus those who have. And I'm one who has. I think I could teach some things, and the fact that I grew the world's largest company in this space doesn't hurt in terms of learning some lessons. So that was part of this thing that had been living with me for a long time. And when I sold PN, I had the opportunity to sit back and think about what's next. Now, I'm really fortunate. Very few people are ever in this position in their lives, but I sold PN for enough that I didn't have to do anything anymore. So it was just kind of like contemplating a different existence, really, right? Like I call it being able to step outside the matrix, right? So most of us grow up learning that you have to get an education so you can get a job that pays you money to be able to afford to live, right? So your whole life is constructed around that. Every book you read is written by someone in the matrix, right? Who's teaching you how to have happiness at work, have meaningfulness at work, how to construct a life that includes work in a way that's valuable and helpful and still leaves room for fun. Well, I had a moment where I realized if I don't have to work ever again, then I can step outside of this paradigm. And it's hard because I'm almost 50. So about 45 years of my life have been bred this kind of thinking. I've done a lot of personal development over time. Everything I've read has taught me to think inside the matrix, and now I have a moment to step outside of it. And so the first thing I wanted to do was actually capture everything I think I've learned, right? I'm outside the matrix now. I can look back in and I can think from this other place now too. And I want to capture everything I think I've learned in 30 years in the field for people who want to work in the field. A lot of people were like, you could just write a general business book and it would do really well. And I was like, that's cool, but those aren't my people. Health and fitness are my people, right? I've had tremendous success in this field. It's all I've ever wanted to do. So let me write a thing for them. So the Changemaker book was born. And so that was essentially, let's start with career, like how to think about career. Now, that concept isn't business, which is what most people conflate the two. It's just how do you think about which direction you ought to point yourself, and how to sustain something with longevity. Then there's, the idea of, okay, cool, I'm going to pursue this career. How do I think about the coaching aspects of it, the business aspects of it, the personal education aspects of it? So how do you construct from the ground up a career that is likely to succeed, both in terms of the financial, realities of life, but also, those metrics of meaning, right? I'm having fun. I want to do this. I can see myself continuing to grow into this for the rest of my life. So that was the point of the book. And I was cool stopping there. Like I was going to write that book and then sail off into the sunset and maybe never work in health and fitness again. I don't know. That my commitment wasn't to not work in health and fitness again. It was just like, we have 4 young children at home. We decided we were going to homeschool them at that point. Maybe I'll just be a homeschool dad, and that'll be my next project of life. But as I was finishing up the book, I just kept feeling like I was called back to expanding on it, to creating this idea of an academy where people could continue to learn broken out these aspects. So, what is a entrepreneur blueprint? What is a course that really helps you delve into the idea of developing a personally relevant career, all these kind of things, but my criteria was, I don't want to do it myself. I don't want to start from the beginning again. And the analogy I use is, when we first started Precision Nutrition, we sold like some physical products, some information products. There were DVDs and books. And so Phil Caravaggio is who started the company with me. We lived together at the time. We had a loft in Toronto, and in the foyer, we had this big closet that was filled with physical product. And like every Tuesday and Thursday, we would walk to Canada Post, the post office, and we'd ship off all the DVDs and books that were ordered that week. Right. That's what you do in the beginning. And as time goes on, we didn't have to do that anymore. We had a staff and we had a fulfillment company and all that. And for me, the idea, I always use this, right? I don't want to be shipping products from my front closet from Canada Post. Again, I don't have to, I'm past that point in my career. So I didn't want to start the equivalent of that, start a new company from the ground up, do it all myself, work tons of hours. When, again, remember, my commitment was to do the opposite, to spend more time at home with my family, doing homeschool and being part of this community here. I wanted the Changemaker Academy idea was only able to come to life because I found a great partner, Andrea Hayes, young, talented team who's really passionate about the same things. And I'm able to, be present at home and be with my family every day and work with my wife, Amanda, on our homeschool project, while, our team is running the academy. And I can dip in once a week, meet with them, share ideas, help overcome any challenges, and then get back to the other thing that's important in my life, more important in my life. So that's really what the academy is up to now. It's really helping to shape people. And it doesn't even have to be young people. There's people who've been working in the field for a long time and feel like they need something more, leveling up, more dovetailing with who they are or who they are becoming. And so we help with that as well.
Yeah, that's great. And it's very interesting, your continual pullback to the industry. I every time I've tried to step away a little bit, I seem to get sucked back in. And I'm sure that that's consistent with a lot of people that are probably listening. It's just a strong passion.
Well, that's it, right? And it's something you've always been passionate about. It's part of your lifestyle as well. It's something that So I often talk about instincts, right? I have instincts for it, right? That stronger here than anywhere else, right? And I found it very interesting helping the new PN team as they take over and lead the company. Some folks come from outside the industry and they don't have the same instincts, so it's all that, right? It's your calling, it's your skill set, it's all there. So when you go try and step out, it's like, man, it feels like something's missing. There's a square peg in a round hole kind of a situation, right?
So let's talk a little bit about the framework that you outline in the book, because this book has been something, personally I've used for my team and a number of the students and professionals that I mentor almost as a textbook to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do your best to kind of distill this framework down into what the book is about, just so people have a better idea of what it is and maybe some important takeaways.
Yeah. I organized the book in this very specific way. I'm a very linear thinker, and I often believe that people's superpowers can also be their greatest kryptonite and vice versa, right? So being a linear thinker really helps me in some domains and it gets in the way in other domains. But in this particular domain, organizing a book, it really helped me, And so the idea was you have to begin a career by thinking about yourself, right? You have to know yourself. So that's the first section. It's about this idea of what is your purpose? What are your unique abilities? What is your value system? And how do we figure those out and integrate them into what you're thinking about doing with your life? And I've heard some people say that when you're young, it's really hard to know these things and you need to go out and just get reps in life to figure out what they are. And I think there's value to it, that idea. And I think we shouldn't put them as polar opposites, right? I think that today, no matter how old you are or how experienced you are, you can start asking yourself these questions and tapping into purpose, unique abilities, and values. Mm-hmm. And then you go out and live life because you kind of have to. There isn't any alternative. And as you do that, you're reshaping your purpose, your unique abilities, and your values. You're learning more about yourself. And hopefully you're doing that until the day you die. So the idea isn't go out and try a bunch of things, nor is it sit down and figure this out in a vacuum and then use that one template you created when you were 18 or 22 or whatever for the rest of your life. It's that these things play together, right? So purpose being that deep-seated pull towards a particular way of being or a particular thing to do with your life. Unique abilities being that thing that you could be or are world-class at, that you can do for the rest of your life and still be interested in, that it'll never get old, or it feels that way. And that when you do it, it adds value to whatever the thing that you're doing is, right? So you like it, it matters, it adds value, and you feel like you could keep going. And then your values, those are the things that you use to define what a good life means for you and for others, right? And we have exercises in the book for you to actually come up with effective ones, useful ones, right? They might not be accurate for the rest of your life. But one of the keys to that is, from reading it, is you use the other people in your life to help you come up with them. No one comes up with these on their own. We have our blind spots. We think certain things about ourselves, but the world doesn't see us that way. So we actually integrate the people closest to us, the people who work with us, the people who love us into this process so we can get like a high fidelity current version of purpose, unique abilities, and values, right? And then when you have that, these become like your compass for the next few decisions. And again, then once you make those decisions, you go out and you experience life and it teaches you things. And then you revisit this process again and say, is it still the same? After I sold PN and I started thinking about life in different ways, I redid all this for myself. And it's really interesting. I did personality inventories. I did this process here we're talking about. It stuff came out different, of course it would, right? And now that's the new compass that I'm using to guide my next group of decisions. So that's the first step, like really knowing yourself. And that isn't done alone. It's done in conjunction with people who care about you. And it's getting at this sense of what will I use as a compass? Because otherwise, this is the downside of the just go out and live life and try things, is that randomly choosing things is a low probability play. You know what I mean? How do you know that you'll ever find anything that you like under those conditions? At least with spending some time in introspection and work with friends and family, you can increase the probability, right? It's not a guarantee, but you're certainly, and that's how I think about life. It's not what's right, what's wrong in terms of progress. It's What will increase the probability? What will decrease the probability? Well, I want to stack the deck in my favor. I want an extra 10% chance of figuring out the thing that's going to make my heart soar, rather than, well, just throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. So that's the career part of it, right? And then the next part is stop thinking about yourself. Okay. You spent a few minutes on that. That's great. Now you have to think about the world. What does the world want? Right. And that's where we talk a lot about client research. We talk about sort of industry research, thinking about, okay, great. Here's who you are and what you think you're great at and what you'd love to do in the world within a certain set of values. Does the world want any of that? Right. And so that's when we think about, I teach the jobs to be done process in the book, which is a way of understanding what people are willing to spend their money on. Right. Because ultimately, career, jobs, all that is contingent upon someone paying you for the thing that you want to do, right? And so that's what we spend some time on, thinking about them. So what do people say they want, but that's not enough? What do they say they're willing to pay for, but that's not enough? And going out and seeing what they're willing to pay for, right? And then that gives you a good sense. Okay, cool. Now we try and integrate the two, right? Here's my specialness. Here's my unique abilities. Here's how I want to spend my life. Is there anything in there that people will be willing to pay for? And I always tell this story. It amuses me of Dave's Killer Bread. So we usually spend the winters down in Arizona, and in the grocery store there, the first time we went down, I saw this bread in the bread section called Dave's Killer Bread. And it stands out because there's a cartoon picture of this guy, Dave, right? And he's got like a mullet, he's got cut off sleeve shirt, and he's playing the guitar, right? And so it's just like, other breads are boring, right? And this one's got rock and roll Dave with big muscles. He's got big arms. And so I'm like, let me check out this bread. So it's like a higher protein, lower carb bread, right? And so I make up an imaginary backstory. I'm like, made up Dave is my hero because here, imagine this guy. He's like, I don't know, he plays music. He likes working out, lifting weights. Because of that, he's like, he likes bread. Maybe he likes baking too. And he's like, how do I add up all this weird stuff into a career? Right. So he decides, well, you know what? I'm going to come up with a high protein, low carb bread that markets to people who like to work out and, whatever. And so he does. And his bread's in all the stores across the United States now. And here's a guy who had a weird set of things. If you said, Dave, what do you like? Well, I like baking. I like rock and roll guitar. I like lifting weights. Like, there's no place for you. You know what I mean? Yep. Dave found a place by understanding, hey, there's a pretty good group of people who are maybe scared of carbs or want to lower their carbs and want to get more protein, but love bread. So he figured out a way. And that is, I think, a good, exemplar for how we ought to be thinking, right? Even some of our biggest weirdnesses could be tweaked into a real thing, a real entrepreneurial venture, a real compelling job. Because the caveat is always because someone's willing to pay for that thing, So that's the second part. And then we start getting into, okay, great. Ultimately, if whether you're selling your own thing as an entrepreneur, whether you're working for a company, being with people is fundamental, right? I call it in the book coaching, right? Because that's how we think in health and fitness. But I've learned as a team leader at Precision Nutrition, as a coach of thousands of clients, as a dad to 4 children, that it's all the same skill. It's being with people. How do you effectively be with people in a way that allows you to have good relationships, get more of what you want out of life, right? Be able to negotiate for the things that you want while helping other people get what they want. And so that's the next part of the book. So first we figure out ourselves. Next, we figure out what the world wants. Next, we figure out how to convince the world how to want more of what we want. And in the process, help give them more of what they want. So that's the section on coaching. So we talk about, the major pillars of being with other people through either coaching or parenting or whatever the case may be. This is one of my favorite sections to write because it's what I've done most of in my career. And people have told me it's one of the most helpful sections. They now see their relationships with other people fundamentally differently. Then we talk about business, right? We talk about, okay, cool. How do you spin something up if you want to run your own thing? And if you don't, that's okay, but you still have to think like an entrepreneur. Almost every job nowadays is entrepreneurial, right? People call working for a company intrapreneurship, and entrepreneurship is running your own company, right? So there is no way to avoid learning about business and having a great career. There's just simply no way to do it. You can skip the business stuff, but then your career will suffer no matter what direction you go in, whether you work for someone or work for yourself or something in between. So we talk about marketing, right? Which again, you think about marketing as marketing a product, but there is marketing yourself. There's marketing ideas, right? Everything is marketing, essentially, right? You asking me to be on this podcast, you have to do a little marketing and get me to say yes, right? So everything is marketing. And so there's marketing, there's business development, there's organizational structure. We talk about all that stuff. And then we talk about continuing education. So how do you actually build an education that is valuable and useful, right? And my favorite model there is the T-shaped learning model, which you may remember. I remember reading about this years ago. People used to use Ernest Hemingway as an example of the T-shaped learning model. For those who aren't familiar with Hemingway, he's one of my favorite authors. But Hemingway was a fisherman and a boxer and a war correspondent and a wine connoisseur and well known as like a dazzling conversationalist. So that's the horizontal bar of the T. He wasn't an expert in any of those things, but he was competent in all of them. And then he was also a world-class fiction writer, maybe one of the greatest, maybe the greatest American fiction writer. That's his vertical bar of the T, right? So the idea is if you draw a T, to have a meaningful life, to be interesting, to be marketable, to be able to, engage in a bunch of situations professionally and personally, you need to have a bunch of domains that you know. You don't have to be a deep expert in them, but that's shallow expertise. And then you need to have one domain that you're world class at, right? And so that's what I try and help people think about building, right? What are the 6 areas that future you, based on your unique abilities, your values, and your purpose, and what you think the world wants, will need to be able to play in that space? Great, go get a bunch of that. And then go really deep into one area that you're going to really focus and specialize in. And again, you can map this out early in your career and then spend the next 5 years achieving it, because the T isn't what you need today. It's what future you needs to be able to crush it and be successful. So that's that section. And the last section is a section called reputation. And the idea is that, I don't know, I've seen it in my career. I felt it so strongly that I had to make it its own chapter, that when you have a good and positive reputation and build it in a specific way, way more doors are open to you. I have enjoyed a great reputation in my career. Colleagues, people even who don't know me, say really nice things about me, which I feel honored by. That was built intentionally. I set out to make sure that people want to work with me, think I'm a professional, think I'm a good guy. Because I think I am, right? So I'm like, I want the world to know that. So I share sort of step by step how to show up in the world so that you build the kind of reputation that you would want, so that people think positively of you, so that people think about you in the first place, right? Opportunities come to people who get thought about, right? So you have a podcast, you invited me on it because you thought of me, right? If I didn't have any reputation or a bad one, you wouldn't have included me, right? And this happens all the time. When people can think of you first, and then something is warm in their heart, or it puts a smile on their face when they think of you, that increases the probability of career and personal success. So I go through a stepwise way of seeking feedback for growth, for sharing feedback with others. There are a whole bunch of domains that can help build your reputation, even to the extent of having what people have coined like crucial conversations. Like sometimes you will have to have difficult conversations with people in your lives. If you do them badly, then you will make withdrawals from the emotional bank account with that person. If you do them well, even in difficult conversation, they'll walk away respecting you and possibly even liking you more. How can you have that skill, right? How can you rush into difficult conversations that need to happen in your life for the sake of clarity or good communication, so that, you not only resolve the issue, but that person walks away saying, damn, that's a good person that I just interacted with. I'd like to work with or be with or whatever them again. So that's the whole context, right? That's the whole book. I think it covers everything one would need to think about. And I think it's iterative, right? As you saw, there's lots of worksheets and exercises. This isn't just a thing to read. It's a thing to work through for the betterment of your growth into that future you that we all should be looking forward to some extent.
Yeah, I love it. And very, very succinct and very linear. I'm a linear thinker as well. So I greatly appreciate the logical progression. The thing that I was struck by most about the book when I read it, I've actually read it a couple of times just for, I think, as you said, it's iterative. You can learn over and over again. And I love that you're doing some of these exercises, around 50 years old after you've sold the company again, because you realize you're changing. For me, the thing I was struck by is that these aren't necessarily things that are taught in your traditional academic settings, which is why I think the book is such a great complement to your standard curriculum, because the book basically makes the point that to a degree, it's not just about what you know, it's about what you do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you bring up that point too, because that was part of the motivation behind it, right? I mean, there's loads of traditional education for personal trainers and health coaches and physical therapists and, strength coaches and everything. But this is all the stuff that's between the lines, right? So that's why in the education chapter, I talk about how to construct a T-shaped curriculum. And then I tell you all the organizations to go see to find those things. I don't want to teach those. They've already been taught and way better than I could. But no one's teaching this stuff. And I think that's why this book is like the world's cheapest textbook ever. I mean, you can get it on Amazon for like $18 or something like that. And it's used in, I don't know, couple of dozen, 30, I don't know how many it is nowadays, university programs. So it's actually built into a number of curriculums as one of their textbooks for this very reason, which I'm really proud of, right? That there are educators like yourself who see the value in it and they're like, hey, listen, for an extra $18, you can learn all the things you're never going to learn anywhere else before you start your career, which is so awesome, right? And then I hope it sits on people's shelves and comes out a few more times over the course of their career as well. Yeah,
it's funny. The first time I read through the book, I've been in the industry since for now 23 years now. And I read the book for the first time and I said, man, this would have saved me a lot of pain and a lot of money had I had read this thing when I was about 5 years in. It's people learning to a great extent from the mistakes you've made.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I that was part of my driving force as well. Like, can I speak to those individuals and save them time and money, or maybe not? One of the common questions people get asked when they're on podcasts is, what would you tell your 20-year-old self or whatever? Right. And one of my favorite answers I've heard is nothing, because he wouldn't have listened. You know what I mean? Yep. That doesn't even have to be like a denigrating kind of idea. Like, oh, that guy was an idiot. Not even. Like in my case, he was, but nevertheless, the thing is, it's hard to think like a 50-year-old who has 30 years experience when you're a 20-year-old, right? My friend Alan Cosgrove, who's super well known in the health and fitness industry, tells me about this one day he got to have lunch with Bill Parisi. And Bill Parisi started Parisi Speed Schools, which was a huge sports performance training brand. And so Alan, as a young trainer, gets to sit down with this guy who's one of his idols. And he's like, I remember I was sitting there, I was setting up my first gym and I was asking him about like what equipment I should put in the gym. And he's like, I'm kicking myself now because like I could have asked him all these life lessons, but I asked him about squat racks, right?
Yep.
And on the one hand, it does feel like a missed opportunity. On the other hand, though, that was the most relevant thing in his career at the time, right? Like philosophical lessons on the big picture of career and meaning might not have been as valuable as, hey, I have 10 grand to spend. I need to outfit a whole gym without going broke. What do I do? Right. That was what was relevant to him at the time. So I only hope that the young people who do end up reading my book, there's enough of the squat rack things and then enough of the philosophical things to keep them feeling like it's useful today, but also something they can grow into the future.
Yeah. Well said. I listened to a podcast recently of yours, the Dr. John Berardi show. For those who have not listened to it, it is an amazing podcast. I almost call it, it's almost like a documentary produced podcast, very unique, very different style. And the podcast series that I listened to was on personal development. This was you just recently released this. And I'm going to ask a question that you answered over the course of 3 podcasts, talking to a lot of experts. So I don't expect you to go into great detail, but basically the point you were making is that there's a double-edged sword with all this personal growth and development work that we do. And you've made a career out of helping people develop personally. A twofold question. One, what even led you down that line of inquiry? And then 2, with all the things you learned, where have you kind of landed with things now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess, for those listening in, I did a podcast exploring the idea of, let's call it personal development, personal growth. Nowadays, even a simple hack for this idea is habits, right? Like you see all these books about habits, right? And people appearing on podcasts talking about habits. So this, there's always been something that felt difficult to me. And I did not know what it was. And so part of the exploration of the podcast, because as you said, I talk to 6, 8, 10 experts on any given topic, and then we produce that into a show with music and narration and things like that. But the thing, mostly I wanted to just explore this thing I was always feeling itchy about. This idea that I would, in the early days of the idea, it would feel uncomfortable to me to see the way that some people talked about habits and their personal development. Again, I made a career about helping people develop. So it's not the heart of this project that was problematic to me. It was just how it was showing up for some people. And I wanted to explore that a little bit. And in the podcast, the first question was simply this, like James Clear wrote this book, Atomic Habits, right? Which comes after BJ Fogg's book, which is Tiny Habits. Like James had to make it smaller, right? From tiny to atomic, right? But those 2 books alone have sold like 4 million copies, right? You have to scratch your head and say, what the heck is going on there? So, I mean, by way of example, and this isn't sour grapes or anything, my book has had a great life and is doing great, but my book will only probably ever sell 200,000-300,000 copies in its whole life. And James Clear has a book on habits, right, that has sold 2 million copies in 2 years. So the question is, and it's not like, shaking my fist at James, but what is it that's so compelling to the general public to the tune of 2 million copies, plus BJ Fogg's, plus The Power of Habit? Just those 3 books are probably 6 million copies total, right? About habits. It's such a niche thing. It's like a niche psychology discussion that now 6 million people have bought books about. What's going on here? What are people hoping to accomplish and why? What do they think they'll get out of this? So that was my first question, right? And then the second thing was, after helping educate 200,000 professionals through the PN certification program, I would always see how they would post about it. So it would always be like a social media post, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, of them like holding their certificate or their textbook with the hashtag never stop learning, right? And again, like I am a student of psychology and philosophy. Those were my minors in my undergrad. I've continued to read on those topics my whole career. I'm just always curious what's going on, right? That's all. What's going on? Like, what are they getting out of posting it in this particular way? And the idea is, like, it kept emerging, is that either people are obsessed with this idea of personal development as a distraction tool from whatever discomfort may be present in their lives. They're obsessed with it because they think it is the path to some kind of future, hopeful future for them, right? And there's a bunch of other hypotheses I had, but I wanted to explore it. So I talked to BJ Fogg, I talked to happiness experts and behavior change experts, and I just wanted to uncover this thing. And it was Bruce Tift, who is a 50-year therapist and Buddhist, who really unpacked it in the most clear terms for me, the thing I was uncomfortable with. I didn't even know this was it until he said it. And I was like, bam, that's it. That's what I've been uncomfortable with all along. And his claim was that there's nothing wrong with personal development, with self-improvement, with self-help, right? It is perfectly natural and good to want to live a better life. We should all aspire to that. But when it takes on a compulsive or obsessive quality, then it's detrimental, right? And that this idea of personal development, so separate idea, this idea of personal development, self-help, whatever, is good, but doesn't lead to freedom, right? And so we should probably unpack what freedom means. But his belief is that's what most of us are looking for: freedom, not success or any of these other things. Freedom in our lives, right? Freedom from compulsion, freedom from playing out patterns, detrimental patterns from our past, right? Freedom from overreacting to situations we ought not overreact to, freedom from feeling bad or jealous or all these things that are natural human emotions, but could be more tempered with a different view of life, with a different way of being, with freedom, right? And so a lot of people will try personal development projects to keep themselves busy, to get this ultimate feeling that they want of freedom. But this isn't the path to it. They don't map to each other. Freedom is something different. So it was really illuminating for me, so again, it isn't, I'm going to come down on self-help and personal development, because again, I'm responsible. My whole life and success and everything I'm pleased about today, that's responsible for it. All the self-help work I did. And, I listened to Tony Robbins audio tapes when I was 18, so I got nothing against it, but there's no question there was an obsessive quality to it in my early life. And I see it a lot in others. I see the glorification of that obsessive quality, people who post about reading 50 books in a month. That's an obsessive quality, right? It's become a contest based on how much information you consume. Well, that doesn't map to success. That doesn't map to future happiness. That doesn't map to freedom in any way, right? So if you've decided you want to be an Olympic champion in reading books, right? And that's the goal. I just want to read more books than anyone else, period. Cool. But that's usually not how it starts. You actually want something out of that. Well, what's the thing? And is this going to reliably deliver that? Right. So it gets a little esoteric and philosophical at a certain point. But that was the exploration there, and what I came away with, if I can distill it down, is personal development's great. If you want to budget some percent of your life towards it, that is a productive effort. However, don't expect it to map to broader ideas about personal happiness, better self-definitions of success, or freedom, because it won't reliably map to that. So you should budget some other percentage of your time on those specific things as well. They're not the same thing. You don't get a 2-for-1 out of it.
Yeah, you nailed it. And the reason I wanted to ask that question as a kind of a follow-up to everything we talked about from a developmental perspective is that I think a lot of the people that read your book, a lot of the people that probably listen to this podcast, are at these developmental inflection points in their life at a really young age. And
yeah, I agree.
You're right. It can be the obsessiveness. It's just like training, right? If you do too much training is a good thing, but as soon as you train too long or too hard, it becomes a maladaptive thing. And that's exactly what you were pointing out here. I will link up to those podcasts on the show notes page, because I think it is an absolute must listen as a follow-up from an episode like this.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you. I hope people do listen to it and navigate their own way through this challenging thing. Again, in general, oversimplifying things in life leads to all kinds of problems.
Yes.
Politics, education, personal development, right? So my podcast's design is to, can we get a little deeper than oversimplifications, right? Because, in this topic in particular, and one of our guests, Dr. Casey Jo Orvidis, said this, at first blush, the idea of like, what could go wrong with working on yourself? What could be bad about working on yourself? And that is an oversimplification of the thing, right? And she's not oversimplifying. She's just saying that's what people think, right? And I agree, right? There is an unquestioned universal good to things like growth mindset. That's the one. Like nowadays, people talk about growth mindset like it is nirvana, the holy grail. If you can achieve growth mindset, you have achieved the point of life. And so it's very hard to question projects of personal growth when growth mindset's the best thing in the world. And then the question just becomes, where does that fit in? And I'm a student of history as well. And I often ask, have people always been like this? Have people always thought all your free time should be spent on personal growth projects? And the answer is no. There's been high value placed on that at various points in history, but it hasn't always been, right? This is a recent modern phenomenon, right? And part of the other question is it sustainable? Like in a world where information is so accessible, how healthy would it be to believe that every free minute should be spent on consuming information in the interest of personal growth? I don't think you could ever feel accomplished in this world doing that, number one. And number two, it would be a really great way to soothe existential pain by staying that busy, to never look at the things in your life that really need work. There's an old way of saying it. I think I first heard it from Alan Cosgrove, who I mentioned earlier. There's difficult easy and there's difficult, right? Difficult easy is spending my whole life in personal development projects. It's hard, it's challenging, but it's easy because you're not facing the hard problem in your life, the thing that really needs work. Difficult is facing the hard problem and working on that.
Yeah, so insightful. Dr. Berardi, I literally could probably keep going for the next 5.5 or 6 hours here, but I think your kids will come running in and out of your office at some point, steal you away. Right. So I want to bring our discussion to a close with a couple of finishing questions. First one is, where's the best place for people to go to find out more about you and the things you're doing? There's a lot of information about you on the internet. Where would you recommend that people go?
Yeah, I'll just come to my website. My website's really simple. It just has sort of a catalog of the various projects that I work on and what I've been up to. So that's just, johnberardi.com. I have Instagram account, I have Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And you can find everything from Changemaker Academy to Precision Nutrition to the other projects I'm working on. And you can jump off, listen to some of my podcasts. I jump off from there. So yeah, if you just pop over to my webpage, you can find out, all the things. So then you can read about what's up and what I've been up to and jump off from there. That's the easiest thing.
Cool. And we'll definitely link up to that in the show notes page, as well as the book and the Changemaker Academy, just so people have the ability to get to all of that. Last question I want to ask is the question I end the podcast on for everyone that I talk to, because it's the thing that I'm most passionate about. And I suspect you have a passion for this as well. And the concept of the wellness paradox to me is this disconnect in interaction and just conversation between fitness and wellness professionals and our medical community. I think we all would agree that if we all could speak the same language and have conversations more often, we'd probably be in a better place. Yet this disconnect exists. I'm trying to solve that disconnect with this podcast. If you were to talk to the fitness and wellness professionals that are out there who are interested in being part of healthcare delivery in this country, what would you say is the thing that they probably need to focus on the most?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a hard challenge. Early in my career, I would have had maybe a different answer than they do today. I think that I'll tackle it from a couple different angles. Angle number one is assuming that it is a good thing, that there were a deeper integration between, let's call it sort of medicine, health as medicine versus health as preventative slash fitness, whatever, lifestyle management. I think there's a big assumption that it would only be a good thing if they all work together. But that's a questionable assumption. We could question that. We could ask, what would it break if they did? If that was better integrated, would it even work? There's one example that I have. I worked in elite sport for a long time. And when working with Olympic level athletes, we used to have these like high performance boards for each team, right? So one of the first teams I ever worked with, I'll use them as an example, the Canadian national cross country ski team. But every group has it: bobsled, skeleton, swimming, diving, doesn't matter, name the sport. So what they do is they have professionals who help with the teams. They have strength coaches, they have performance coaches, they have nutritionists, they have psychologists, they have their medical staff, whatever. So then periodically, let's say once a quarter, they would all sit together at a round table and they would talk about different athletes and the challenges they were having, and try and come up with a integrated treatment plan for them, or go forward plan. I remember sitting in on those and in the beginning, before I actually had any experience with them, and thinking, man, this is what it all ought to be, right? Like all the providers sitting at the table. And then I sat at a bunch of those tables, and rarely did anything meaningful come out of them. The domains are so distinct, the ways of thinking are so distinct, that even when we all sat together, it was difficult to speak the same language, to agree on a plan, right? Someone had to be made in charge of the plan, right? Because they have to decide among competing points of view, that I was like, man, I don't see a clear way for this to ever work, right? The only way it could ever work, in my point of view, is if we stop speaking French, German, Italian, in other words, our own discipline's jargon. And we were all trained in the same language. So then all of a sudden, do psychologists, exercise scientists, personal trainers, strength coaches, nutritionists, and medical doctors in different disciplines all have to be part of a med school? Like, are these all degrees that have to be taught in a med school? Do we do rounds together? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like an untenable problem, right? To get on the same language, to get in the same thinking. And if we did that, where would new ideas come from? If we're all taught the same language and the same thinking, then very little innovation is likely to be brought out of that. So these are some of the pros and cons that I've seen in the practice of this. Now, with that said, I remember a conversation I had with a fellow grad student of mine. Now, this person exceeds me in every way. She's amazing. She has an MD and a PhD. She has multiple gold medals at the Olympics. So she's a multiple Olympian. She's got MD, PhD. She's just the ass kicker, super high achiever person. And her graduate studies were in exercise science, and her med studies were in sort of rehabilitative medicine. And I remember meeting with her because, see, I got out sooner than her because, I didn't have to go the whole MD route after I finished my PhD, and I had a business. And so she called me and said, let's sit down and chat. Like, I want to think about what's next for my career. And I remember having these mixed feelings because what her goal was to sort of promote exercise as medicine, right? And I'm like, there couldn't be a better spokesperson for this, right? Multiple time Olympian, MD, PhD in exercise. Like, you're the person to do this, right? The idea being, how do we achieve this thing, like resolve the paradox in some ways, right? How do we integrate exercise and lifestyle and prevention into medicine? And I remember this question occurred to me, which was, You, my friend, will probably spend the rest of your career, every minute of your career, simply trying to make headway on this. Like you're not going to solve the problem in your career. It's too fast of a timeline, right? And when you die or retire, will you be okay knowing that almost nothing has changed? Right? Like there have to be pioneers, there have to be these people breaking new ground. Like maybe you'll have moved the needle, or maybe you'll simply have inspired a next generation to take the baton and work on this. But are you cool spending, let's say, the next 40 years, 50 years, maybe, knowing that you're going to work on a thing that is the infrastructure is so ingrained that it's not going to change in your lifetime? This is something to think about before you go down this path, right? And I don't mean to seem negative about it. I hope I don't sound too excessively pessimistic, but I think that's the reality with machines like this. They don't change in a lifetime. They change in multiple lifetimes. If exercise and sleep and stress management are ever fully integrated into the medical paradigm, you and I won't see it in our lifetime, my friend. We will be long dead. Our children may not see it in their lifetime. Now, that's not to say don't work on it, right? Because the only way change happens is through people working on it. But to put into context what I'm saying here, my answer is I don't think we'll see it in our lifetime. It's going to take a special group of people who probably have a kind of fortitude and being determined, more than I have, to push it forward. What that looks like, have no idea. Imagine, like, we're talking about maybe 2 generations into the future. Who knows what medicine or exercise look like at that time? But it is going to take some loud voices of people who are highly reputable. Like even me, I could make no headway into it, because when I show up and I don't have an MD, people will be like, like I didn't understand medicine, right? It takes someone super special, like my friend who has an MD and can say, no, I'm credible in that world, who has training in exercise science and lifestyle and preventative and has credibility in that world, and maybe even has a couple Olympic medals, right? So they're a celebrity to push this kind of thing forward. So that's my pseudo pessimistic, super long timeline. Haven't seen it work before in the context where it actually has a chance of working answer. But again, for people who've done this work, like what's my purpose? What's my unique abilities? What's my values, right? So this friend of mine, that answer, this exercises medicine work answers those. It is her purpose. It is her values. It is her unique abilities. For people who have that, then they go work on that, like that. But that brings us back to where we started, right? If those aren't your purpose, unique abilities, and values, do something else, because it's going to be thankless work,
I love it. So insightful to question the fundamental premise. Dr. John Berardi, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who's listened in. Hope you got some value out of our conversation.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Berardi as much as I did. If you found it informative and insightful, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares really do make a difference. Any additional information from this episode that we'd like to link up, or any information on Dr. Berardi, can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 23. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again, please be well.